Welcome to the Monterey County Sheriff's Candidates Forum focusing on social justice and the Office of the Sheriff. I welcome you on behalf of the Monterey County Methodists for Social Justice. I am Alice Ann Glenn, a retired United Methodist clergy connected with this church. A huge thank you to Monterey United Methodist Church for hosting this event. We thank Carol Cuffman and Deacon Don Boyd and their committee for the refreshments. There are some resources on the table in the entryway, and if you didn't earlier, you may want to pick those up on the way out. The format for this evening will be that I will give a brief definition and overview of social justice, followed by introducing our candidates. Each will make opening statements of up to 3 minutes, followed by my alternating asking the social justice questions focused on the topics they were given prior to arriving here tonight. At the end, we will have 20 minutes for written questions from the audience. Please print. The questions should apply to both candidates, and question cards go to Michael Cunningham. Michael, will you wave? He has cards.
I am here.
Okay.
I will be checking legibility.
At the end of the Q&A, there will be 3-minute closing statements and by each of the candidates. Social justice seeks to address the root cause of a problem by advocating for changes in institutions and political structures in order to prevent a problem. Law enforcement plays an essential role in social justice by ensuring that all citizens of Monterey County have equal rights, equal opportunities, and equal treatment in the enforcement and prevention of criminal activity. This forum provides an opportunity for the 2 candidates for Sheriff's Office to provide their positions on social justice issues that fall within the scope of the Sheriff's Office. Some examples of social justice issues are de-escalation and the use of force, the transfer of detained immigrants to ICE, racial profiling, the use of community policing, and building inclusive community relationships. The role of the Sheriff's Office in addressing both homelessness and gun violence, and accountability and oversight of the Sheriff's Office. To my right is Joe Moses, currently the only captain in the Sheriff's Office. Joe joined the Monterey County Sheriff's Office as a deputy in 1994 and has served in a variety of positions. He served as commander of the Special Operation Divisions from July 15 to January of 2018. He served as commander of the Special Operations and then commander of the Jail Operations Division from January 18 to 2020. He is currently serving as the captain of the Custody Operations Bureau, and Joe is a member of the American Jail Association and Monterey County Deputy Sheriff's Benefit Association, among others. To my left is Tina Nieto, currently the Chief of Police of Marina for the past 5 years, as well as the Monterey County Community Restorative Justice Commissioner since 2018, and the current president of the Monterey County Chiefs Law Enforcement Association. She also serves on the State Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, where she will help develop best practices for California law enforcement. Tina is the Executive Director of Marina Police Activities League, also known as PAL, which helps oversee a local youth crime prevention program. Before we hear from our first candidate, I want to point out Brenda Cunningham at the back of the room, who is going to be our timekeeper. She will be giving you a 30-second and a stop sign. We appreciate each candidate staying within the time so we have time for all the questions. The candidates' opening statements, done in alphabetical order, is a response to a question sent to them. Please share your perspective of social justice as it relates to the Sheriff's Office. And Joe, if you will start.
Before I start my time, if we could just give an ovation to the staff here that set everything up, the food, and allowing us to be here tonight. So thank you very much to all of you. Well, good evening. Again, thank you for coming out here and spending this evening with us to listen to these very important topics that we're going to talk about today. Whenever we talk about the Sheriff's Office in relation to social justice, what we really are talking about is experiences and our perspectives. That's really at the crux of social justice. Understanding each other's perspectives, listening to each other's experiences, and then building upon those so that we can build those relationships that we need. I would like to share with you tonight in my opening about my experience and my perspective of where I come from and why I'm here today. First of all, in 1991, I was a young college student, had already decided on my career in law enforcement, and I was watching TV one night. And I saw the beating of a man by officers in LAPD, Rodney King. And I was angered, saddened, frustrated, and I thought for the first time I doubted my career path in law enforcement. I thought about that, I continued with my schooling. 1 year later, I saw the beating by another gang of thugs of Reginald Denny. He was pulled out of a truck in LA during the riots. And I vowed at that point that I was going to go into law enforcement for the reason that I want to protect those that cannot protect themselves. I've carried that through my career. I continued with that mission, and that's where I come from. That's my experience. In 2020, I was watching TV once again, and I saw the murder of George Floyd. Again, I had those feelings that came back, that sadness, that frustration, that anger. What are we doing? Because I'm watching as the officer that in my career, somebody that's stood up or took an oath to protect and serve, and yet they behave that way. So although we've made a lot of leaps and bounds in social justice, in law enforcement, there's a long ways to go. I know we can all agree in this room that we do have a long ways to go. We're making our strides, we're making our steps, but we need to continue. And what I want to do, the reason why I'm running for sheriff, is because I want to continue to protect people. That's what I want to do. And I have an opportunity to lead Monterey County Sheriff's Office in that direction. I have an opportunity to continue the work that we've started. And I understand Monterey County, I understand our politics, I understand our diverse communities that we have throughout the county. And that is why I'm running for sheriff. And I look forward to our conversations that we're going to have tonight and hearing from you and your perspectives. So thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you, everybody. Let me just introduce myself. I'm Tina Nieto, and just to give you a little bit about my background, I come from a large working Hispanic family. We actually grew up very poor. My parents, my dad was a bartender. My mom never graduated from high school. She actually got pregnant at 16, and with my older sister. Ended up raising 6 children. 6 children on one salary. I became a latchkey kid at a young age because my mom had to go back to work. She had to go work in a plastics factory. And when we first moved to the neighborhood that I grew up in, my father and my parents scraped the money together to buy a house, so we were very blessed that we were able just to get a house. And my father would get stopped every night for about the first 2 months on his way home from his job by the local police department. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He had a beautiful blue Chevy. I look at the old pictures, and my father, he looks Hispanic, I guess is the best way to put it. And that's a stereotype, even on my part. But he would be stopped, and he would come home and he would share these stories about being stopped by the police. And as children, we would hear this. And I got to tell you, I felt a little bit ashamed because I thought, my dad's not doing anything wrong, and I don't understand why he's being stopped by the police. We were only like the second Hispanic family in this huge neighborhood to move in. And the police eventually, they didn't ticket him, but he would come home at night after all the police officers on that watch got to know him. And so I'm a very complex individual when it comes to my identity, who I am, overcoming adversity, and understanding some of the pain that it is to be different. Because I've been different my whole life. I just am who I am. I always say that about Popeye, and I can't be like everybody else, but yet I joined a profession that a lot of people didn't look at me.
And I can tell you I love law enforcement though. I love law enforcement. Law enforcement has been good to me and my family. My grandfather, who worked in the radio shop in the city of Los Angeles, fixed police radios. And he was very proud of that. He was very proud of that work. And so I'd also hear those stories from my granddad. And so when I joined the police department, my grandfather was so proud of me. And it brought up a lot of different feelings for me, knowing how when we don't get it right, it makes families, it makes communities feel, knowing the pride of wearing a badge that you never want to tarnish, knowing the family stories. My grandfather, the same one that fixed radios, hated the Dodgers because they kicked family members out of Cesar Chavez to build the stadium. So I'm a very complex individual, and I look forward to answering some of these hard questions about how I feel about social justice and the programs that I've done over the past 3 decades. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. Our next question, and Tina, we'll start with you on this one, is how will you incorporate diversity and a culture of equity and inclusion at all levels of the Sheriff's Office, including what data will be used to assess these areas?
So thank you for that question, because that's another thing that's been near and dear to me, and it's been written in some of the papers, but I actually did, so I'm a product of the public school system. I went to community college and then off to state college, and eventually I went on to get my master's. But I did my advanced degree in looking at diversity, actually, looking at the women in law enforcement and underrepresented groups in law enforcement, because this is very important to me. Because I got to tell you, it was hard. It was hard moving up through the ranks from the agency that I was from. When I became a command officer, even back in 2008, I became the first Latina command officer they ever had on an agency that at that time was 139 years old. And you would think even in 2008 this wouldn't be happening in our communities, which told me that there's not the diversity of thought, and you don't just promote people just because they're one thing or another, but just the opportunities that, when people see this, they say, I can do that too. But I did my master's program on diversity and how do you bring up groups to be better represented, and I'm certainly going to apply the things that I learned from my paper to the Sheriff's Department. And I can say that with confidence because I later went on and joined the Hispanic American Command Officers Association, and I spent like 7 very active years with them, and our whole focus was helping to promote people of color, underrepresented groups within law enforcement agencies, not just with Sheriff's Department or police departments, but this is actually an international organization. And they actually came to me to recruit me for the organization because of my work with creating mentoring programs that work. And there's various science to it, but you have to look at how you're going to do it, whether it's going to be formal or informal, but I'm not going to talk about that, but I'm just going to talk about that. You really have to work on those things. I can tell you even at Marina Police Department right now, I'm part of the 30 by 30 program, and it's a commitment to try to bring 30% women into law enforcement by 2030. And there's certain things that you have to do. We have trainings, chiefs of police, we talk to each other across the nation in order to work how we can do that. I'm very proud of the fact that recently we just promoted a female corporal, best qualified, and from Marina Police Department, the first female SWAT officer for the peninsula is from Marina Police Department. And I believe that's just from the support and setting the culture and the tone of the department to encourage people that may not traditionally look a certain way in order to succeed in organizations. So I'm going to bring all this knowledge, all these skills, all these things that I've learned, my heart, to the Sheriff's Department in order to better represent what our communities look like.
Thank you. Joe? Certainly. I certainly can repeat it. How will you incorporate diversity and a culture of equity and inclusion at all levels of the Sheriff's Office, including what data will be used to assess these areas?
Well, thank you for that question. Where it starts is at the top. Leadership is where it starts. When you want to create a culture or change a culture and make sure that everybody is treated equally, fairly, and with empathy as well. So it starts at the top. We recently had a finding against the sheriff's office from the civil rights office that said that some of the people at the top were guilty of sexual harassment. The statement that I made after that was put out there was very strong, and I knew I was going to have some political ramifications from that. But I made that statement because that's the right thing to do. That's what you have to do to make those changes. The sheriff's office has done a good job on hiring people that's reflective of our community. However, we don't see that in our upper ranks. And that's what I'm going to bring. I will bring into those upper ranks people that are qualified, but people that bring a different perspective, as we talked about. People that bring a different perspective, so that we have a more robust response to the problems that we're facing. Because as the sheriff's leader, we are facing a lot of issues, and there's not only one way to fix them. And so we need the input from more people with more diverse backgrounds to address those issues. So that's where it starts. We also have to talk about walking the walk, talking the talk. When that came out, when that lawsuit or that finding came out, I took a very strong stance immediately. My opponent did not take that strong stance. She said that she needed to see the report from the Civil Rights Office before she made a decision on whether or not she would keep the individual in her executive management team. That is not how you change culture. And now it's starting to come out that there are people within Marina Police Department that are also starting to come forward and saying that they have been harassed and retaliated in Marina Police Department. So we really have to look. We can sit up here and talk all we want, but you really have to look at the actions. You have to look at where we're at on a very molecular level. At the sheriff's office, I am supported by the women of the sheriff's office. I'm supported by the people that work for me and my staff. In fact, many of them come to me and say that they have been harassed by the campaign from my opponent and from my opponent to support her and her campaign. That is not the way we do it. That's not the way we should do it. And that's not what works here in Monterey County. We need to make sure that everybody has equal voice and they're entitled to their opinions. So that's how I feel it. You have to look at, as we're going through this election, you have to look at what is actually taking place and who's the person that's going to make that actual change, is doing it today and doing it now.
Thank you. And the next question will be for you, Joe. You have some thought. Right. What is the role of the sheriff in who, how, and when mental health services are provided both during arrest and in the jails? You're welcome to look over here.
Okay, thank you.
I did a big print.
Very nice, thank you for that. Looking at mental health, that's a big issue for our society, for me as a captain in charge of the corrections operations. It takes teamwork. We have to work together to address the mental health issues that we're facing today as a society. Whenever we look at homelessness, when we look at substance abuse, I think mental health is the basis of a lot of that. What I'm doing today is I'm bringing in a lot of mental health services to the county jail to help stabilize people that are going through crisis, that end up in our county jail for reasons that probably don't have to do with legal reasons, but mental health issues, and there's just no place else to take them. I am currently working with behavioral health, with the state for funding to build a behavioral health center to address this problem, to have a place to take people that are in mental health crisis, to get them the help that they need, the medications, the counseling, so that they are ready to be transferred back into our community and to be successful, giving them the tools that they need to be successful. So the sheriff's office plays a big role in mental health. I work very closely with, like I said, behavioral health, with all of our county agencies, the police chiefs, the mayors, talking about mental health. What can we do to make a dent, to address these issues? So that's my stance on where the sheriff's office, the part that we play. And I will bring, as sheriff, I will bring people to the table. That's what I do now. Talking about that behavioral health center, that shouldn't be run by the sheriff's office. But we certainly can be the advocate, and you can certainly come in and use my office and my conference room to be able to talk about these things and to come to a conclusion that is sustainable and something that actually that does work. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tina.
Thank you. So since my opponent wants to go there and we talk about who's accused of what, it's recently come out that my opponent failed to report sexual harassment when he was aware of it, and that many of his colleagues are coming forward and saying that he was aware of it. As far as what I asked about people in arenas, I asked, was an investigation done, and what was the outcome of the investigation, and was it immediately brought forward to the city? Because that's what you do in sexual harassment. It doesn't matter who does it. There's processes in place in order to deal with it. It doesn't matter what level that you're in the organization. You know, in the statement that I made to the paper about whether I would have a certain person in my executive team, the statement was, I'm going to look at everybody, I'm talking to everybody about who would be part of the executive team, but I wasn't going to make judgment based on an investigation that I haven't seen. And why I said that is because for many, many years, and for my entire work life, I guess, or just who I am, there have been many people who have judged me based on not having all the facts because of how I live or who I am. And one thing I can tell you as a leader, I don't just judge because I have half a story. A leader needs to understand the whole story. Your leaders in law enforcement understand that people have certain rights. It doesn't matter how bad they are, they have rights to tell their story. And I didn't know the whole story, unlike apparently my opponent, or at least parts of the story that I would have reported had I known. Talking about mental illness. Mental illness, the sheriff's office shouldn't be in the business of mental illness, but unfortunately, we're the last person that you call when everything else is failing. And so the role of the sheriff's office and the power of the sheriff's office is really important in our community about building collaborations, because nothing is done in the vacuum. Behavioral health, we're all very aware, the chiefs are very aware of monies that they're trying to get to work on these issues of mental health and behavioral health. And it's not just one person that does it. It really is a collective effort of the entire community to come together to provide these services for people that deserve these services. And so I'm a big proponent. If we can get it built, great. I'm going to be 100% behind these services for mental health, because your law enforcement is responding to way too many of these calls and shouldn't be. I can tell you, as a post commissioner, I'm pushing legislation, because I have an opportunity to talk to our legislators about how we can make law enforcement better, to better serve and create safer communities.
Thank you. And so Tina, and this is sort of a follow-up on what already has been brought up. You both made statements about the sexual harassment charges that recently became public. And what will you do if elected when receiving sexual harassment claims? And what other accountability and oversight the Sheriff's Department and jail operations do you see is needed?
Thank you. Sexual harassment is not just about policies and procedures. I can tell you the policies and procedures already there in our sheriff's office. It's more about the culture. It's a culture where the victims don't feel power to come forward and say anything. And it's an entire culture that just doesn't happen overnight. It's not, it was this way one day and it was this day the next day. It starts to erode over time when tragically what we're hearing in the news happens, where sadly we now have 5 victims, and to the victims and to their families, I'm sorry that happened to you with our sheriff's department, because when these things happen in law enforcement, it affects us all. My opponent talked about some of the very tragic things that happened between law enforcement and the community they were serving that led to a lot of change on our agencies. But one thing that I've always done, because I've been in this business for 33 years, and I've been a law enforcement executive for 15 of those 33 years. And so I've had people that have made complaints, and you have zero tolerance. And we've had zero tolerance for a very, very long time, as long as I can remember. So I'm not, and the Me Too movement, if that didn't tell you, you got to report it, I don't know what would. But it's got to be reported. But more than that, we have to go out and educate our workforce that they have alternatives to reporting. Because sometimes when people don't feel safe in their organizations, they will not report it to their chain of command because they don't believe their chain of command is going to do anything about it. And, sadly, I think we're seeing the, ramifications of that may or may not have happened on the Sheriff's Department. I don't know the whole story. I'm not part of that. But what I know what I'm going to do is that I'm going to hire people that share my same values of trust, integrity, accountability, that we take care of our employees, that we value our workforce, that people are treated, with dignity and respect, just the basic human dignity that we all deserve at any place that we work. Because that, when people feel valued and they know there's systems in place when things don't go so right, then they work really hard for you. And we get a better, safer communities as a result. We get better collaborations working with our diverse communities when we, work in that manner. Because it's not just a, hey, we're going to do this, but it becomes part of everything that takes place within your organization. And I know that because I've successfully led organizations, again, during my 3 decades of being in this business. And sometimes we have some bumps. And I can tell you, the one thing I can guarantee you as a sheriff is when we mess up, I'm going to tell you we messed up. And I'm going to put things into place to fix that. I'm not going to wait till it gets leaked and then suddenly, say, oh, now I know about it. But I'm going to do that.
Thank you. Joe, you ready?
Yes. Just dovetailing off of the last question.
Yes.
Let me go back to the knowledge of the harassment. So let me clarify that. When I was made aware of the harassment, the person that was making the complaint was a good friend of mine, was a colleague of mine for a long, long time. And when she came to me to lean on me to get support. And she had already made the complaint to the Civil Rights Office. There is a process, as my opponent has said, there is a process in place. That process was being followed. And so I made sure that process was being followed, and then I followed up with supporting her through that process. So that I wanted to clarify that. And also, when we talk about oversight, Civil Rights Office did an investigation. They got the complaint, they talked to all of the people that were involved, they got the interviews, and they came out with a finding. The finding was that this did actually occur, and that punitive action needed to be taken. I don't need any more than that. I shouldn't, as sheriff, I don't need to read the report. That's what oversight is about. Now, will I look at the report? Of course. However, I will follow all of the recommendations from that report. And the fact that somebody was found to have sexually harassed an employee, we need to take a strong stance. That's how you change the culture. You take that strong stance, no matter what it means for you personally. And that's what I did in this case. And it hurt me a little bit politically. But that's okay, because it's the right thing to do, and that's what I've done my entire career. That's what I will continue to do. So that's what the essence it comes down to, is when we talk about changing the culture, it starts from the top. It starts from taking a strong stance so that the people, as we talk about the code of silence, the people in your department, in your office, understand that you will stand up for them, that you will acknowledge them, and when it is brought to your attention that wrongdoing has happened, you will take a strong stance and you will address it and you will deal with it. That's how you change culture. I do also want to say, though, that within the Sheriff's Office, your Monterey County Sheriff's Office, we don't have that culture. It is at the top right now, but we're dealing with that. And we're going to see a new sheriff. So that is going to be addressed there. But when we start talking about our commanders and our sergeants and our deputies and our support staff, we don't have a prevalent culture of sexual harassment. And I want to make sure that that is clear to everybody, that we do have very hard men and women working in the Sheriff's Office that come to work every day and do what they need to do and hold themselves to high integrity like they did when they took that oath. So I just wanted, like I said, I wanted to make that very clear, and I think we're beat that one up pretty good.
Okay. So, you're next.
Okay.
So, racial profiling is defined as the discriminatory practice of targeting individuals for suspicion of crime based solely on an individual's race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin. What policies and training regarding racial profiling and the use of stop and frisk will you put in place if elected?
Well, state law has already done some of this work for us. With the RIPA laws, where we are required to report on the gender, the ethnicity, the perceived language, that information is already being collected by our deputies on the street. We started that, and we are compliant with that law that went into effect. And so that has already been answered for us. The Monterey County Sheriff's Office is doing that. We are compliant, and I think it's a very good thing. But the other part of that is, how do we use that information? So when we report that information to the state, and that information comes back to us, how are we using it? We need to look at it and make sure that we are being equal in how we stop people, how we address people, what actions we take. Make sure that we are doing the right thing, as I talk about. The other thing is, lost my chain of thought a minute there. Oh, putting in place new procedures. Thank you. And it comes down to training. We do training with RIPA. That is part of that law. But the other thing is talking about implicit bias. We are doing a much better job today than we used to do on addressing implicit bias. We all have biases. We all do. What we need to do is we need to acknowledge those biases and then move from there. And the way that you do that is you give experiences. So when we're in a classroom, we do a lot of scenario-based training. We have people playing roles so that our young officers and deputies, as they're going into a scene on the street, they already can draw from these experiences that they've had in a controlled environment. And we can also critique them, and we can talk about different perspectives, so that when we are out there patrolling, that we have that perspective, we have that experience we can draw upon, instead of just having our deputies or our officers that watch on a screen some video about implicit bias and RIPA and those kinds of things. But we're actually doing experiential training. I want to expand that even further. We need to continue that movement and continue pushing forward. And so as sheriff, if I'm elected, that is what I will push. That will be a heavy part of our training regimen at the sheriff's office for our in-service training. Thank you.
Thank you. So RIPA's been around a very, very long time, the state. I'm a post commissioner, so we actually put together the policies and procedures. Not me, I wasn't a post commissioner at that time, to collect this data. The problem is, because the question addressed it, is what do you do with this data? You as a leader, what do you do with this data? And it's more beyond just training, and I absolutely agree it's about experiences. But it's about the culture of the organization itself. So we have all the training in the world, because there's a lot of agencies that have gotten in trouble that have had a lot of training, that talk about experiences. But it does start from the top. It's about what we allow to happen in our organizations, what we allow deputies to do or not do, the actions that we take when we get complaints, how we look at our policies. Do we have humane policies, or they're called community concern policies, or are we citing people just to cite people and maybe we shouldn't be? I mean, this is a conversation that's even going on in the governor's office right now, right? Some of the legislation is talking about, should the police even be writing jaywalking tickets, because they know from the data that people of color, especially men of color, and Latino men, represent more from the data that's been collected here since California instated the RIPA laws. And everybody's reporting now, because it kind of started with big agencies and they moved down to the small agencies, and everybody's in compliance on RIPA, just so you know that. And we do monitor that at a state level. But we have to look at, what are we talking to our people about? What me as a sheriff, when I'm going out and talking about human dignity and respect and human decency, am I talking to the deputies? Am I talking to my supervision? Because it's not just one rank. It's everybody in the organization that creates the culture. And the person at the top and the leadership team at the top are supposed to be walking that talk to ingrain with the people below what is allowed in an organization and what isn't allowed in an organization. So I can tell you as a sheriff, there may be some laws that come forward that our communities say, hey, we don't agree with how this is written. And through community concerns and stuff, we can take a look at it. The sheriff, the power of the office of the sheriff is a lot. And they can look at how we enforce these programs. How do we treat our, incarcerated population in the jail? Are we talking to them? Are we treating them with human, decency and dignity? Are we meeting the mandates of, the settlement that we have not yet met? Which is just talking about human decency and medical needs that we've been in since 2015. And we're doing a better job, but we're not there yet. So that, with the RIPA data, with racial profiling, with, unconscious biases, we can talk about biases forever. And they'll still exist if we don't work on the cultures of our sheriff's office.
Thank you. What plans do you have for policies and training regarding the use of force and de-escalation to prevent or reduce the extent, volume, and scope of violence during arrests?
So, as a police chief, we actually look at these. I just recently recommended to other police chiefs, and some of your smaller cities actually are in what they call insurance pools. And so I recommended that they come in and they do audits under use of force, under the things that cause lawsuits, under things that where sometimes we mess up in law enforcement, even with deputies, and to look at our policies and procedures. I have an auditing background from the agency that I came from, and one of the things that I learned as an auditor, and which I would bring with me forward, which I've done even as the chief of Marina, is that are we auditing those high-risk situations that are going to cause us money, that's going to violate people's rights, that are going to be negative headlines in the papers, and most importantly, it's the right thing to do for our communities and treating our communities right. And so for use of force, I got to tell you, I'm going to come in. I know that the Sheriff's Office uses Lexipol. My agency uses Lexipol, but you do have some subtleties. You can look at your use of policies. Do you allow, certain types of ammunitions? Are you taking certain types of, equipment? Just recently, the law changed where all agencies have to report what they call military use equipment. And that came as a result of people maybe buying inappropriate equipment or acquiring inappropriate equipment for their communities. Communities don't need tanks on their street. Bottom line, they just don't need them. We're not in a wartime situation. So it's speaking with the communities, and definitely, after looking at the use of force policies as the sheriff, I'm going to be talking to all the groups in our community, because community policing is actually involving everybody, not just what Sheriff Nieto thinks, but talking to your groups out there, and groups that may have felt like they didn't have a voice in the past. And so I'll be looking at that and meeting with them whenever we're looking at policy changes, and I do this already too, because as a post commissioner, we're constantly evaluating policy. If you ever go to the Post website and you look at our agendas, we're dealing with all these issues that you're asking these questions about. And I'm representing the state. Not only am I representing the state policing for everybody, but I also represent, the Central Coast. And so it's very important for me to try to get it right and try to understand these issues. And as a sheriff, I'm just going to take that with me to try to understand these issues and try to get it right. But most importantly, look, as a sheriff, you look at these things, but you have teams that you have to develop, and they need to understand what is going on. So I'm going to ensure that my people are trained, they understand the policies going on, that we're staying up on the current legislation, the changes, best practices, and we're going to be talking to other agencies. So that's just one of many things that I'm going to do when it comes to use of force and dealing with these types of issues with my community.
Thank you.
Well, I really think it comes down to getting more into the weeds than just looking at policies. The policies are there. We do have people looking at policies. The state dictates a lot of the policies that we currently have. But really, what it really comes down to is when we talk about changing that culture, when we talk about our operations. Let me tell you a little bit about the safety that we're doing in the jail by changing the environment. We're down between the last fiscal year and this fiscal year, we're down 24% in inmate assaults. We're down 37% in inmate on staff assaults. And we're down 30% on attempted suicides. So what that tells you is that we're making our environment safer, and we're making it so that we don't have as many altercations as we had in the past. And I think that's one of the keys to making sure that we are not using excessive force, that we are only using the amount of force that is necessary to keep ourselves safe and to keep the people that we're dealing with safe. The other thing is that we have to make sure that we do our training. The training is a key. I talked about implicit bias training. Part of that also is the de-escalation. I'm a member of the Police Executive Research Forum, which is an international group of scholars and law enforcement executives that get together and talk about these very things. What are best practices? What is the right thing for policing in general? As we talked about, we're going through changes. We know we're going through changes in law enforcement. And so this group of international scholars and executives get together and make sure that we're ahead of the curve. What they've developed is what's called ICAT training. It's integrating communications and assessment and tactics. So that kind of training brings in what else can we do. It was interesting. I went to a class in Boston. It was a 3-week class, and we had some people from England there, some police officers from England in that class. And in the off time, we were sitting there talking about why do you Americans keep shooting people with knives? Like, well, they advanced towards us, so we shot them with knives. Shot them because they're endangering my life. And they said, you know what we do in England? We back up. So that's a change in that culture, and we are starting to see that today. We can retreat, tactically retreat. There are times when we do not have to stand the ground. We can retreat a little bit, and you're starting to see that in our society. But I've been thinking about this for years, and this is the thing that I've been bringing into our jail. Another thing that I'll share with you in my last 30 seconds is I was seeing a trend in the jail where we were using force, appropriate force, to subdue inmates. But I saw a lot of distraction blows. So basically, the distraction blows, you punch somebody to get their attention away, and then you take them into custody or handcuff them. I saw these distraction blows being used way too much. So we started doing roll call training. We talked to the deputies and said, why are you using this? Why are you doing it this way? And we are changing the culture. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is, the leading cause of death for children in America is gun violence. What policies and procedures do you recommend to address gun violence in Monterey County?
Wow, that is a heavy topic and a tough topic. We are struggling as a nation dealing with gun violence right now. Our smartest people, our people with most experience are struggling with what to do. Here locally, what I see we need to do is 2 things. 1, enforcement. Making sure that we're getting out in the streets, make sure that we have enough deputies on the street to actually get out of the car and build relationships with our communities, to know where the problems are, to nip them in the bud before they get too big. The other thing is talking with our youth. Getting a school resource officer program that's expanded is what we really need to do. We need to address our youth, not just about the gun violence, but we're also talking about the fentanyl crisis that we're going through. There's a lot of different things that starts with our youth, gang violence also. So I want to expand our school resource officer program. I was a big proponent of the North County School Resource Officer at North County High, and I also was instrumental in making sure that our school resource officer stayed in Carmel High. But we need to expand that. And as sheriff, I'll have more influence over our entire county to grow that program. It shouldn't just be in the high schools. It needs to be in the middle schools. It needs to be in the grammar schools. Not just to make sure that our kids feel safe and are safe in their campuses, but also to build that relationship that I'm talking about. They see that the person behind the badge is one of the good guys. And they have that relationship built. And I think that's how we're going to start addressing some of this gun violence, is doing it at a younger age and having that relationship built, and then making sure that whenever we do see something, when we start seeing problems, that we are there to take action prior to it becoming a big issue.
You know, gun violence, too many of our kids are dying. Bottom line, too many of our kids are dying from gun violence, too many of our kids are dying from fentanyl. You know, no family wants to go through that because of that. You know, I'm kind of torn on the school resource officer program though, and I went through a lot of it when some of the communities don't want school resource officers. Not every community wants somebody in their school in that role. And as a police chief, I had to sit and listen to some of these communities. I actually went over to Seaside and sat through one of their forums early on when they were looking at removing the school resource officers. And they had some very legitimate concerns about the program. So I think the key is that whatever programs we put in place, especially like the school resource officer, that we do it with our communities, that as a sheriff, I just don't say, you need this because I think it's a good thing. That we sit with our different communities and say, what are you guys are looking for? What's the goal here? What's the goal? What are we trying to do? Where are we, what do we want to do with this? And I think the answer is that we want kids not to die in our schools. We don't want them to die in our schools. So there's many different ways to look at the gun violence issue, and really it's talking with your communities. Early on, one of the things that we did here in Monterey, or in the Monterey area and Monterey County, is the Gun Safe program. And the Gun Safe program was about educating parents that own guns to lock them up and to store them safely, because there's children dying from guns that aren't stored safely. And I was one of the few chiefs that supported that and actually sat on a panel to talk about why this is a good idea. I've experienced, not in my own family, but, I've been on school shootings. Some people know, but most people don't know that. I was on the UCLA shooting on campus right before I came up to Marina. So I see the trauma that affects our communities when you have trauma like that. And after that, I sat on several panels with the different communities to talk about how we could do it better with our schools, with our colleges. We just have to do it smartly. We need to be talking to our communities. The ones that want school resource officers, that's a great thing. I know the Monterey County Office of Education just got a $1 million grant that I signed a letter of support back in June to look at school violence, and we're using the San Mateo model, and we're hiring a company to do it. So as your sheriff, I'm going to be talking to the community and supporting these programs that make a difference, that represent best practices.
Thank you. There has been tension around immigration issues in the jail and the transfer of inmates to ICE. Might Monterey County stop all cooperation with ICE and return inmates to their families and communities upon release? Please explain your response.
So actually my opponent and I just answered this for the Monterey County Weekly. It was one of the questions that they asked about, how you would deal with ICE. There are already laws in place in this state that your legislators decided that you can't have ICE desks in jails, and they can't be at certain places, and because the bottom line, when you look at community policing, when you're looking at the safety of communities need to feel safe no matter who that community is, what they look like. And our communities that may be people that don't have legal status in our United States don't feel safe if they think their law enforcement professionals are going to be turning them over to actually Homeland Security to be deported. And the stories that we hear that come out of it, or that kind of led to the legislative change, was they were being deported for not paying a ticket or not registering their car. So we have to create communities that trust the police. And so I support what the legislation did. I actually support that, because study after study and community after community, it didn't make it any safer when you looked at this across the nation. The one difference I would say, though, is that our legislation has also built in that when it's a violent offender and it's in the penal code that they're a child molester, they committed murder or whatever, that's the time that we can have a conversation with our federal partners to look at the processes and procedures of how we can keep our community safe. Now, you have to realize the Sheriff's Office is not doing the deportation on those individuals, but we have to keep those lines of communication open if you truly are looking at creating the safest communities we can from a law enforcement perspective. What I can tell you as a sheriff, I'm going to be going out there and talking to these communities that in the past have felt like, you know, they've never seen their sheriff or talked to their sheriff. So to build that relationship, even maybe at this level, but to start the relationship. And with my officers, you know, I talked about building, you know, where we have people that we talk to communities, not just as one, not just one foundation or one, you know, police advisory board, but we base it on different communities, because different communities, although they're alike, and they all just want to have, you know, jobs and put roofs over the table, food on the table, there's different needs for different people. And so much more collaboration and communication needs to go on. That's been one of my things that I've talked about since I've jumped into this race. And so these are some of the ways that I believe that law enforcement should be working with our federal partners.
Thank you.
Well, my opponent had the advantage on that one. We've both written the same, pretty much the same thing for the weekly, so we both feel the same about using ICE. You know, getting out into our community, again, understanding that what the needs for law enforcement are in Greenfield may be very different than what they are in Pebble Beach, and having an understanding of that. And that's what I bring to the table. I have worked in every single part of this county. I know that everyone has a different perspective and a different need from law enforcement, from your sheriff's office. And so with that understanding, I will build advisory councils, advisory boards throughout the county. Not just one board to advise, you know, on things to the sheriff's office, but we're going to build it throughout. And the other commitment that I'll have is I probably will not be able to make all those meetings. However, I will have staff that will be at those meetings. And it includes our farm workers. It includes our workers, the hospitality workers here on the peninsula, to make sure that their needs and their voices are heard as well. And that's very, very important, especially when we're talking about trust in the community. That's what we need to build, and that's what we have been building. That's what we need to continue to build, is that trust. And I have a plan. I have a definite plan on how we're going to do that. Another way that I'm going to reach out to the community is I started through this campaign, I started Just Ask Joe video series. So I have people write in and ask questions, and I will get on video and I will talk about and answer those questions. I will carry that over into the sheriff's office if elected. And we'll probably change the name to Just Ask the Sheriff. But you know, that's one way that we can communicate in a broad way and bring those questions in so that we can answer them as a department, as a community, and address the needs that we have. I don't know all the needs that you have. I don't sit in an ivory tower and pretend to know everything. We need to reach out, we need to work together, we need to collaborate together so that we can address the issues that we are facing today.
Thank you.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
They go, oh no,
We've
there's
been doing a
page
lot of
2.
these, so.
Qualified immunity is hurting our country as it allows enforcement officers to break laws and appears to be a double standard when citizens must follow laws. Please describe in lay terms what qualified immunity is and where you see abuses of its use and how those abuses might be eliminated.
Well, that's a good question. Layman's terms. Let me talk about it in layman's terms. So, qualified immunity essentially is when an officer or deputy is working in the line of duty and carrying out their duties, and they make a mistake. Unfortunately, in our line of work, when you make a mistake, dire things happen. And so, qualified immunity allows these deputies, these officers, to carry out their duties without the fear of being sued, as long as they're following policies and procedures. The caveat is following policies and procedures. So we are human. We're entitled to make mistakes. We want to minimize those mistakes as much as we possibly can. But when they happen, we have to have some protections. If we completely got rid of qualified immunity, we would struggle even more than we are today to get people to put in applications. Can you imagine if you are a deputy or an officer with a badge and a gun, and you're told to go out and enforce the laws, communicate with our communities, people are going to be aggressive towards you, they are going to try to shoot at you, they're going to try to kill you. But if you do something wrong, you're going to lose your house, you're going to lose your car, you're going to lose your retirement. I don't think we're going to get too many people that are going to want to be in this. But what we need to do is we need to take a look at that and what else can we do without completely getting rid of qualified immunity to be able to have some protections for our people. When you go to the doctor, one of the reasons why it costs you so much to go to the doctor is because they buy insurance for malpractice. That's what qualified immunity is for the public, which we are public servants. Qualified immunity is that malpractice insurance. But when you break a law, when you're way outside the boundaries of policies and procedures, then you need to be held accountable. And we are seeing officers being held accountable when they break that trust, when they break those rules and those laws. So I'm a big proponent of holding people accountable. I will continue to hold people accountable. In fact, I can't get into personnel issues too much, but I had a deputy that violated those things. And what would we do? He's no longer an officer. The other thing that I will say is that we need to keep that record so that that officer who is not qualified to work in Monterey County as a deputy sheriff can't go to another city, another county to work as a deputy sheriff or a police officer. We need to make sure that you may be a great person, and many of these people are, but they'd be a better banker. They don't belong in law enforcement. So that's my stance. I hope I summed it up in a way that you understand, but it is a very complicated issue, and it's something that is being looked at very closely, and changes are being made as we speak to qualified immunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think my opponent's going to be very happy to know that the law changed last year, that we do keep that record. It's called SB2. And so SB2, just to explain real quick, since I threw it out and you guys are, what is SB2? Is that the legislation actually changed that now says when an officer, we can decertify officers. Me as a post commissioner, I can decertify an officer that they can't be an officer in this state, and you go on a national database for the states that have that, they won't be officers there because of the problems of some law enforcement that leave some agencies and then get hired by other agencies, and the other agency didn't know that there were issues with that officer. So that's been done. That's been done already. That's been in fact since January. So that's statewide. That is statewide, SB2. Right now, we're just dealing with the things at a state level. We're looking at there's 9 areas that you can be decertified, and you can be decertified for a year. We can take your certification away completely. And I'm one of those post commissioners that gets to do that for the entire state. I'm one of 18 people that look at this. But getting back to qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is a very, very complex question because, as my opponent stated, it is like an insurance policy, but we also shouldn't hide behind qualified immunity, and that's where the problems are with our communities about understanding what it is, because qualified immunity affects not just the agencies, but it also affects your cities. Because the people, if you took away qualified immunity, who gets sued is the counties, as we all know, because the county's in a whole bunch of lawsuits. And so those monies come from the general funds when we settle those things. And so qualified immunity does give officers the ability to make mistakes, that they're not going to lose their job. And so people are like, yeah, I'm not going to be a cop because I could lose all these things that my opponent talked about. The problem is, though, is that sometimes qualified immunity protects folks that may or shouldn't be in law enforcement. And I say that as a law enforcement professional because not every agency has the same rules of how you do things, right? Qualified immunities, a definition, but how the rules and procedures are different from agency to agency. And so you may have violated something if you did it with this agency, but yet if you did it with this agency, you're okay and you have qualified immunity. So that's the problem, because there's not a standardization. And probably in my lifetime, they won't be in a standardization, but I know that your legislators are looking at that. But one thing I can tell you, as your sheriff, is that I'm going to make sure that we have the best practices in place, that they're trained, that we limit mistakes, and that we're doing right for our communities to make them safe.
Thank you. General. How will you oversee, encourage, and put systems in place for community policing to build relationships through positive interactions, partnerships, and problem solving?
So, one thing, again, because Joe and I just answered this, for the Monterey County Weekly, but if you go there and you read my questions and answers, I talk a lot about community policing and why I follow community policing model. Community policing is not just a thing. It's a whole philosophy on how you look at organizations, how you look at the structure of the organization, how you do your training, how you develop your culture, how you problem solve to reduce crime or make people feel safer in crimes or even eliminate crimes. Because law enforcement, our job is safe communities, bottom line, to protect and to serve, as they say. And it also talks about how you work with your public, your private, government, other government agencies, how you work with your media, how you work with different religious groups or, the faith leaders in your community about tackling a lot of problems. You can apply it to anything. I'm a proponent of the SARA model. I like that model for looking at stuff, and you can look that up. I only got 3 minutes, so I'm not going to take my whole 3 minutes for that. So I'm a huge proponent of community policing, of developing strong relationships, because at the heart of community policing is about developing trust. Developing trust with your workforce, developing trust, with the communities that you serve, the very diverse communities that you serve, and developing trust even among peers, even among like the leadership team. We have to learn to trust each other, but in the right way, not in the wrong way, I always say. I want to mention real quick, getting back to use of force, because it's been in my craw, but I've actually been one of those people that has done stuff for SMIP, has done stuff for PERF. I've been to DC on 2 separate occasions to sit on national policing boards to look at use of force issues. And within the last 5 years that I've been the chief of police here in Marina. So I can tell you as your sheriff, I am going to be very cognizant of what is going on in our communities and our different communities. I'm going to be an active partner with our communities to look at the many complex issues that happen when you're in charge. And in the next 4 years, there's going to be a myriad of things that we're not even talking about today that are probably happen to whoever the sheriff is. And I can tell you, as your sheriff, I'm that person with the critical thinking skills and the person who knows how to develop collaborations. I'm the person that knows how to listen, to create or work together to create solutions to the many, many problems that face law enforcement today.
Thank you.
Well, community policing is really what it comes down to for the sheriff's office. If you think about the almost 4,000 square miles that the sheriff's office patrols, if you're not interacting with your community, if you don't have a good relationship with your community, you're in for a world of hurt. We depend on each other. I was the Big Sur deputy for almost 3 years. And I can tell you, whenever I stop a car for whatever the violation might be, I might have 2 or 3 people pull over, citizens, and say, "Hey, Joe, you okay? You need anything?" That's the kind of relationship that we have with the sheriff's office, and that's what I understand, and that's what I grew up with. We already interact with our community in a very positive way. Today, with the shortages of patrol deputies that we have, it's getting harder and harder to get out of that patrol car and have those relationships with the community, get to know our business owners, get to know the kids, get to know, our neighborhoods. So that's where I talk about increasing patrol. We do need to increase our patrol staffing. One of the ways to do that is through recruitment and increasing our recruitment and targeted. We need to go after the younger generation, figure out what appeals to them, make the sheriff's office an appealing career in law enforcement, because I still love Monterey County Sheriff's Office. I still love going to work every day, and I want to pass that on to the next generation. How do we do that? We have to appeal to them. We need to get somebody that's younger, 25, 30 years old, understands marketing, understands social media, to be able to market the sheriff's office as a good career. And the other thing is, as we getting out and talking to our communities, getting out to know the communities, also finding out, again, what are those needs? What do they need in their particular community? You know, if I have a deputy that's working in Castroville for the last 3 years, he's going to have a very good, or she is going to have a very good understanding of what is needed in that community. And what we need to do, and what I will do and instruct my staff, is have that come up through that chain of command so that we can address those issues, again, before they become a bigger problem. That's the very essence of community policing. It's what the sheriff's office has done for a long time. It's what we will continue to do. And just depending and working together on some of these issues. One other thing, while I have a little bit of time I wanted to touch on, is our volunteer services. When we talk about our short staffing, I'm a huge proponent of our volunteer services. I was the commander in charge of them for a long time, and we really built it up. So we have a Citizens on Patrol through our Sheriff's Emergency Assistance Team that we can use more to get that patrol car out in your communities. Out, like right now, whenever we have like a rash of burglaries down at Point Lobos, we'll send a car out on the weekends and they will be patrolling up and down that Highway 1 to be those eyes and ears for the Sheriff's Office. We don't always have to look to the deputies. I know a lot of you want to volunteer, you want to help and be a part of the solution. And so I welcome you to come into the Sheriff's Office. I welcome you to play your part to make our communities safer.
I want to just take a quick pause, and Michael, have we gotten any questions from the audience? If you could bring those up as I talk about the next question. So, what is the role of the Sheriff's Office in addressing our county's homeless population?
Well, again, I think this kind of goes back to the mental health issue. I think the mental health, if we start taking more robust action to address mental health, we're going to see a lot of that homelessness population go down. Again, building that behavioral health center, I think, is a key part of trying to move forward into the future, trying to reduce that number. I know that a lot of people in our community are working on housing. A lot of people are bringing resources to our homeless. But we need to deal with the underlying issue. We need to address that. And building this behavioral health center with 100 to 120 beds run by our behavioral health and our community-based organizations, that's where we're going to see the biggest difference, I think. We are doing a good job at this in this county right now. I was just listening to Supervisor Askew talk, and she was talking about how our numbers in Monterey County, homelessness numbers, are actually going down, whereas the state trend is going up. So we need to continue this momentum, and we need to build on this momentum going into the future to address homelessness and to address that mental health aspect.
So, you know, I talk about the power of the Sheriff's Office again. You know, I agree. The Sheriff's Office can take part in looking at homelessness from the mental illness part of providing services while inmates are in our custody. But let's face it, law enforcement should not be in the business of homelessness. We should be working with our partners more, collaborating, and I know Monterey County has done well in its numbers, and one of the reasons is that we've done so well with our veteran homeless. And that's a lot because of our federal partners have worked over the last couple of years to help bring those numbers down. But you know, the underlying issues of homelessness are not just mental health. Maybe with the chronic homeless, that's true, and that's a small part of the population that law enforcement tends to have to deal with. But the underlying issues with homelessness are much more than mental health. We have homeless youth. If you actually look at the Homeless Coalition and all their reports, you know, we have a huge number of youth that are homeless. We have families that are homeless. We have people that have just lost their houses that become homeless. People living in their car. I mean, this county, and the reason I say that is Marina has a lot of the nonprofits that are in Marina, and I talk with these folks all the time, so it's not just about mental health. Certainly, we should continue the programs that are in the jail, you know, to deal with the chronic homeless, but we should be partnering with behavioral health to look at these issues. And I say that from the experience, again, of being a police chief, of being in charge of, or being the president of the association with all the police chiefs, because this is a question and a conversation that we've been having with mental or behavioral health, who's having problems bringing people on board. So it's not because we don't care, right? And also some of the things that we're doing with mental health and dealing with this is You know, I've been very supportive of the new system where instead of calling 911, you call 988. And I know that our county communications is dealing with that. Leanne, I've had several conversations with her about how are we going to do this because the state's moving in this direction. So what I can say as your sheriff, you know, I'm going to continue with the programs that I have influence over as a sheriff within the jail to get treatment for people, to be talking to other organizations so there's a safety net when we release these people back into our communities so they don't continue to be, you know, a problem. But the reality is, as the office of the sheriff, I have to be standing there, you know, with the other leaders of this county to say, hey, maybe we do need more money to go into like housing or to go into these programs, and be very supportive or saying, or having the conversation with them to say, you know, as your sheriff, you know, with our board of supervisors, what do you need from us? What do you need from us to work on this homeless issue? Or, you know, making sure that I have representation at the Homeless Continuing Coalition, that there's a sheriff's representative there. I don't know if that's happening now because I've been to the meetings as a police chief. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But my job as a sheriff is to ensure all those collaborations are taking place.
Thank you. There is a clear conflict of interest with the current sheriff also being the coroner, especially in designation of cause of death and police-involved shooting or injuries. If you are elected, would you consider separating the coroner from the sheriff, with the coroner being a doctor or a medical professional, as is true of other California counties? And please give your rationale.
So this is not the decision that the sheriff gets to make, right? The sheriff gets to make a recommendation. I don't want to do this, or I do want to do this. What I can say is if our communities think that there should be a separation, if our legislators, our board of supervisors thinks there should be a separation, then me, just even as a voter or a county taxpayer, I want to know the reasons why. Because you can't just say, well, it's two people and so I'm just separating them, because a coroner's office is part of the sheriff's budget, is part of it, and you can't just give and take. So what I would say, just like with oversight, is that you have to be very thoughtful on how you do that, how you structure it to create a separation. Your Sheriff's Association in the state of California doesn't support that, and I've read the papers that listen to why they don't support it right now, and most of it is because I think it seems like they want to see what the plan is and not just react to people because this happens to be the hot topic. So I guess that's kind of a fuzzy answer because the answer is I don't know, but I can tell you as the sheriff, should our elected officials, should our county voters decide that this is a direction they want to move in, as your sheriff, I'm going to give very thoughtful answers. I'm going to make sure that my team is doing the research to present the best information we can for the folks that are making the decisions to make the best decisions for our county.
So am I clear in understanding this is a county-by-county decision to separate?
Not right now, it's the state.
It's state, yeah.
It's state.
It's legislation.
State.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What's the answer?
We don't have an answer yet. They are not separated. I will speak as an experience with 28 years with Monterey County Sheriffs and talking about what the coroner's office does. The question started out with, there's a clear conflict of interest. I don't see the clear conflict of interest. So if we were in a different format, I would ask for more clarification on that question. The sheriff's coroner is responsible for doing a death investigation and determining cause of death. When we have an officer-involved shooting, when we have an incident of somebody that dies in our custody, the sheriff's coroner does come in to determine how they died. But that investigation is done by somebody else. The actual criminal investigation is done by somebody else. I am a supporter, when we have an in-custody death, of bringing in the district attorney's office to do the investigation. I think that is the clearest way to do it. I think that avoids that conflict of interest that you're talking about. But when we talk about separating the coroner's office from the sheriff's office, I don't see a need to do that. We don't have any incidences where there's any question about that in Monterey County Sheriff's Office that I'm aware of. And if I'm mistaken there, please come up and talk to me about it after this. But I don't see a conflict of interest. I think we do a good job on doing those death investigations. And if we create a different branch within local government, is it going to be another elected position? So are we going to have an elected coroner and an elected sheriff? Or is it going to be run by the Board of Supervisors, which gives the Board of Supervisors more power over that, and then we have conflict of interest there? I think the way that it runs is good, and I don't think that we need to create more bureaucracy within our local government. I don't see any issues that we have with our current coroner's office and the way that it's set up throughout the state.
Thank you. We have 2 questions from the audience, and then when we finish those, we'll have our closing statements. Oh, got another one? Okay. The first one is, can you tell us about a time when you had to manage a large disaster event involving multiple agencies?
Well, I'll start that question with my background. I have a master's degree in emergency services administration. I've been an instructor at the state level for Office of Emergency Services for search and rescue operations. And I was called upon, I run incident command throughout this county for a lot of our large fires and floods. I was called upon whenever the Camp Fire burned through the town of Paradise. I was called by the Office of Emergency Services to come up there and run that search operation. There was 1,200 structures that needed to be searched, and we had thousands of missing people. So when I arrived, I talked with the sheriff, and the sheriff told me, I want every single one of those structures searched, and I don't want anybody to return home to find a loved one's remains at their house. A major operation. We called in search and rescue teams from throughout the entire state. We had search dogs from all over the country. But what made this really interesting and challenging for me was also bringing in the fire teams to work right beside law enforcement and the search and rescue teams. Bringing in the anthropologists, because once we found something, those searchers don't know if it's a human remains or an animal or a piece of porcelain. So bringing in those experts to also assist. And then, if that was identified as human remains, we also had the DNA experts, rapid DNA teams to come in to identify that person rapidly. At the same time, we also had a major investigations going on, missing person investigation, because we knew thousands of people had not perished in that fire, but we didn't know where they were. So tracking those down so we could check off the box and make sure that everybody was accounted for. And I will tell you, at the end of 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks, we were able to search every single one of those structures and locate every single victim. And that was from my leadership of bringing that many people of varying professions together to work towards a common goal and accomplish that huge task.
Putting an X on every house that had been searched. I used to live there.
So, I've been on several fires. Obviously, I came from a large agency, and every year our hills were on fire. And I've been a member of many leadership and command teams. And I know that we have an audience that probably doesn't understand, well, some of you do, but everybody doesn't understand how these are done. So usually in fires, it's a unified command, and usually it's not the police person that's actually the incident commander. And maybe it was different on that fire. But usually it's there's a fire lead, and as you go more into recovery and stuff like that, the lead changes on unified commands. What I can tell you is I've been on multiple scenes where I've been part of what they call the command and leadership team. And I won't bore you, but the command and leadership team is part of the ICS system. And then there's branches below it that the leadership team is making the decisions for the overall management of the crisis that's occurring. And it's not just, when you look at it, it's not just crisis that's occurring at that time, like fires which just occur, but it's also looking at big things that occur. So here, like in Monterey County, car week's a big thing that we have to really think about, the structure and how we handle that so it doesn't turn into crisis. The UCLA shooting that I handled, I actually was the incident commander on that. I ended up getting relieved because when you set up a system like that, somebody can come in and relieve you, and then I later ended up becoming the operations chief. And many of you understand the incident commander usually just rolls into the operations piece because they understand more of what's going on than anybody else at the issue. I've also been parts of things that, there's a lot of liability to it. I was part of the command and leadership team that moved the space shuttle. I'm very proud of that because not many people get to say they moved a space shuttle. But that could have gone very wrong, very quickly, very badly. And so that was an operation that was just supposed to be a couple of days that turned into about 3.5 days, and we had to change on the fly. I've been part of teams for large events that could have turned into civil unrest. I've been on large events that are civil unrest. I've been on labor May Day and some of the big labor protests. I've been part of the command and leadership team, so I understand ICS. I understand ICS, what they call TEACS trained, and it's some federal training that's done in Texas. And I've continued to train. If you look at my training record, you'll see that I've had pretty much every school you can go to in the ICS system, just because I've been in this position so many times as part of that leadership and command team. In the city of Los Angeles specifically, I was considered what they call subject matter expert. And so that's why I was on so many events, because I would get, not only would I have to run my part of the city, but I would get pulled in to do these things. So I'm very experienced in dealing with crisis, both unplanned and pre-planned large events.
Thank you. We're getting more questions than we may be able to do in the time that we had said, and it'll depend on the audience later if you want to hang around and hear them, because we're trying to stay to the time format. The next question is, from the audience, would you hire the most competent or the most diverse?
Hire or promote?
Hire.
So when you're a leader of an organization as a chief, you have to look at several things. If they're coming in and they're a brand new employee, they have to meet certain criteria to come onto an organization. And so when people apply and they meet these criteria that the state has set, and also the agency can set certain criteria, so you then get a pool of people. I've always been the one person that believes when all things are equal, then you have to then look at the diversity of your organization if you truly want to increase that type of representation. And so with all things being equal, I would say they all have to be competent, because I always say you don't hire or promote people that can't do the job. But with all things being equal, you do look at the diversity thing. But it goes way beyond just competent or diverse. It really goes about leadership when it comes to promotions and agencies, of really mentoring the underrepresented groups that haven't been mentored, to show them that they have a path to be able to go on and promote to either sergeant or commander, or vie for chief deputy, or maybe even one day become a sheriff or a police chief. And so as a leader, you got to spend a lot of time doing that. Again, I talked early on about mentoring and developing underrepresented groups is near and dear to me. It's projects that I've been involved with, my entire adult career in law enforcement, because we have to create opportunities for people. And I guess it's near and dear to me because my entire career has been that of obstacles. And there have been roadblocks in my way. I'll be honest, I don't just come in and they say, wow, we just want to hire her because she looks like us, and that unconscious bias that occurs sometimes. So I know in my heart the only reason that I'm in the place that I'm in today is that because there were people in my life that put their hand out and said, I see something in you, and I'm going to work with you in order to help you get to whatever you want to be. I think diversity is important in our communities. I think our communities need to see their law enforcement that looks like them. I think, part of the problem is that whether it's true or not, there's a perception that maybe they don't think like me, even if they do, because we don't know. I think it's important to diversity, that people see that you can get to a certain level. I'm hoping to be the next sheriff, and as the next sheriff, I'm hoping there's young girls and young boys that may look like me that can say, I can be a sheriff too, because there's not a lot of us. There's not a lot of chiefs that look like me either, and that's beautiful. So I just want to point that out. So I got to do laughters, but really. it is about, I understand, as a sheriff that people are going to be looking at me and saying, I can do it too because she's there.
No, I got it, thank you. The most important thing is competent. That's what it comes down to, being competent. Our hiring practices should be colorblind. That should not factor into our hiring practices. But where it does factor into is recruitment. How are we recruiting? What demographic are we recruiting to? Making sure that everybody feels like they have an opportunity to get into Monterey County Sheriff's Office and have an opportunity to be a deputy sheriff with us. And that's what it really comes down to. So when the question was asked, is it competent or whatever the word was, but it's competency. We need to make sure that we have competent deputies, competent staff that are working. That's number one. But again, as I talked about, it's about how do we recruit? Making sure that everybody has that opportunity. And making sure that we have pathways open for promotion, that we are supporting everybody within the sheriff's office to have an opportunity to promote, to show what they have, the skills that they bring to the table. Show them that they have the right attitude. Show that they have, if they are on that career path, that we will support them and give them the support. No matter who you are, no matter what color you are, no matter what your gender is, that you have the opportunity to move up in the sheriff's office.
Thank you. The other questions that came in were addressed only to one of the candidates, and we asked that all the questions at the beginning be for both candidates. So I would suggest the people who asked those talk with the candidates. At this point, we are ready for their 3-minute closing statements, and then I will say a word, and then there'll be more refreshments in the hall back there and a chance to talk and hang out with both of these candidates.
All right, well again, it's been a long session, I know. Thank you for listening to us and listening to what we have. I've enjoyed hearing from some of the questions about perspectives, as I talked about at the beginning of this forum, that I wanted to learn about your perspectives, and I'm taking away probably as much as you're taking away. So I appreciate the input, and I appreciate the questions that have been asked and our opportunity to be able to answer those. But what it really comes down to when we go into this election is we make sure that we elect the right person for the sheriff's office. We need somebody that has the experience, has the integrity, has the commitment to this county to be sheriff, to make the changes that we need to make to go down that path. And not just change for the sake of making change, but let's make change in a way that makes sense and it's sustainable. A lot of times we talk about change and we think that, well, we're going to make this grand plan, we're going to change all this. But in reality, it's not going to work that way. So you need somebody with the experience in Monterey County Sheriff's Office, having worked here for 28 years, that understands how to make that change, how to make that cultural change. I'll also say that as the captain of the corrections operations, I manage over half of our budget. I have a $79 million budget with 320 employees that I manage currently. That's over half of what the sheriff's office is. That's what my opponent doesn't have. She has no experience in the jail. She's never worked in a jail. She's never managed a jail. I do. I've been doing it for almost 5 years now. And so that's what we need in the sheriff's office. And the ideas, the vision that I have for the sheriff's office to protect and to serve you is what's most important, and that's what needs to be considered during this election. I will do what's right for the people of Monterey County, and I'm running for Monterey County Sheriff for all the right reasons. So thank you again for listening to us.
Thank you. I just want to be very clear about this. Diversity does matter. We're talking about social justice. We wouldn't have had the many lawsuits that we've had in our profession if this wasn't an issue that we have, and we haven't solved it yet. So, when I talk about competency and diversity, a leader has to look at both, and you can't pick one over the other. But I can tell you it matters. I wouldn't be where I'm at if we just based on the question of competency. Because the problem with that is that who's judging what's competent? And that's why we have lawsuits. That's why we talk about social justice. That's why we talk about systematic racism and what it does to create unfairness to different communities. So diversity matters. Second of all, you're right, I've never managed a jail. I've managed large budgets, but one thing I can tell you is I know how to manage people. I've managed large numbers of people. I have success after success in managing people. As a sheriff, I'm not going in to feed the people. I'm not driving the bus. I will if they want me to. I'll get my license if that's what the community's asking me to do. You know, I'm not walking the prisoners from one bay to another. No, I don't do that. I don't do that as a police chief. I'm not out writing tickets. But what I do know how to do very well is create the best teams to support the people in the organization that are doing that job, to do it the right way with dignity and respect for everybody. That's why I've had success after success, year after year, with my development of people. And that's what I understand. I understand people. And so, I didn't grow up wanting to be the sheriff. I tell people that. My bucket list was to be the police chief. I'm here before you today because your law enforcement leaders wanted, and community leaders wanted somebody with my experience, and I'm the most qualified candidate here running for sheriff today. And they're the ones that encouraged me to run. Your county leaders encouraged me to run. Your law enforcement leaders encouraged me to run. And you know, at some point, when you have enough folks coming at you saying you should really run, and then really having those deep conversations of why, sometimes you gotta look up and say, okay, you're sending me a message, I get it. I'm in it to make things better. People deserve better, they deserve good leadership, and they deserve leaders that care. And I can tell you, as your next sheriff, I am that person. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to both of the candidates, and thank you all for coming. And let's give a big round of applause to the candidates.